The year is 1692. Welcome to Salem. A small settlement in Massachusetts, America, Salem is a religious community presided over by priests. The play begins with Reverend Parris kneeling by his daughter Betty's bed, crying and praying that she may soon recover from whatever illness has trapped her in her bed, motionless. The Reverend yells at Tituba, his slave, who enters asking about Betty, and then resumes his position by Betty's bedside as his orphaned niece, 17-year-old Abigail Williams, enters the room. Susanna Walcott follows her with a message from her master, Dr. Griggs. The poor doctor has no idea what has happened to Betty and suggests that her illness may be the work of witchcraft. Reverend Parris dismisses the thought, but sends for a witchcraft expert, Reverend Hale, for a second opinion. By now, the people of Salem are starting to gather around Reverend Parris's house, suspecting that Betty's illness might be the first sign that their town is infested by witches. With all the commotion going on outside, Reverend Parris turns to Abigail to ask about what she was doing last night when he spied her dancing in the woods with Betty, right before she fainted. Abigail replies that there was totally nothing suspicious going on last night. Betty just happened to faint right as they happened to be dancing in the woods. Abigail says that it was the shock of being discovered that made Betty faint. Reverend Parris isn't so sure. A few townsfolk from the crowd outside begin to enter the bedroom, starting with Mrs. Ann Putnam and her husband, Thomas Putnam, who also insist on witchcraft as the source of Betty's illness. Interestingly, they also mention that Tituba was supposedly summoning up their dead daughters the night before. What is going on? Later on, Mercy Lewis and Mary Warren, two servants from the village and Abigail's friends, enter the room. They manage to wake Betty for a moment, who suddenly rushes to the window. To everyone's horror, Betty yells out that Abigail drank blood in the woods as a charm in an attempt to kill John Proctor's wife, Elizabeth. Later, we'll find out that Abigail used to be Elizabeth's servant before she was fired for having an affair with John. Now that's what I call a scandal. Worried that the truth will come out, Abigail forces the other girls to stick to the story that they did nothing but dance in the woods and that it was really Tituba who was messing around with witchcraft. After all, she did conjure up Ruth Putnam's dead sisters. John Proctor, a farmer in his mid-30s, arrives and Abigail tells him that they were not performing witchcraft. She reveals her feelings for John, but John rejects her advances. Outside, Reverend Parris is singing a song from the Bible with the villagers when Betty bolts upright and begins screaming. Horrified, Anne thinks that Betty is screaming because she couldn't bear to hear God's name in the psalm. Is this a sign of witchcraft? Reverend Hale finally arrives and begins his investigation, questioning Abigail and Tituba about what the girls were doing in the forest. Abigail claims Tituba forced her to drink chicken blood, while Tituba counters that Abigail begged her to conjure a deadly curse. After Reverend Parris threatens to whip Tituba to death if she does not confess to witchcraft, Tituba accuses Sarah Osborne and Sarah Good of witchcraft. Abigail follows her lead and denounces Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne and Bridget Bishop as witches. In a terrifying turn of events, Betty joins the crazed blame game. Is anyone telling the truth? We hope you enjoy this Schooling Online production. For more easy lessons on the Crucible, check out our summary of Act 2.